All right, let's dive into one of the most incredible chapters in the Gospel of Matthew. Chapter 17 is a real roller coaster. I mean, it takes us from this dazzling, literal mountaintop high and then throws us right down into a chaotic, messy valley low. And just when you think you've got your footing, it throws in a few more twists that are powerful and honestly kind of strange. You know, at the heart of this whole chapter, there's a question that I think we've all faced at some point. What do you do when that amazing, life-changing moment, that peak experience is over and you have to go back to the mess of everyday life? That's the journey we're going to explore today, from the mountain to the valley. So our story kicks off at the very peak, and I mean that both literally and metaphorically. Jesus is about to give 3 of his closest friends an experience that they will never, ever forget. He pulls aside his inner circle. You've got Peter, James, and John, and he leads them up this high mountain. And the key detail here is that they're by themselves. This isn't some public show. It's a really intimate, stunning revelation that's meant just for them. And then, everything changes. Jesus is transfigured right before their eyes. His face starts shining like the sun. His clothes become this brilliant, blinding white. And then, out of nowhere, 2 giants of Jewish history, Moses, the guy who gave the law, and Elijah, the great prophet. They're just there, talking with him. As if that wasn't mind-blowing enough, a bright cloud comes down and surrounds them, and a voice booms from inside. And this is it. This is the ultimate divine endorsement. The disciples are so terrified they're hiding their faces, and they hear God the Father himself confirming who Jesus is and telling them, listen to him. This is the absolute high point of the mountain experience. But here's the thing. You can't stay on the mountain forever. As they come back down, the entire scene shifts dramatically. That serene divine glory up top gives way to chaos, desperation, and failure down in the valley. And the whiplash is just jarring. This really captures what the disciples must have felt, doesn't it? The central tension of this whole chapter is the stark contrast. You go from heavenly glory to raw human suffering, from a clear divine voice to a chaotic, screaming crowd, from being overwhelmed with awe to finding their friends completely overwhelmed by their own failure. So what's waiting for them in the valley? A man runs up and kneels before Jesus, just begging for help. His son is suffering from these horrific seizures, so violent that they throw him into fire and into water. And then comes the gut punch for the disciples. The father says, I brought him to your disciples, but they couldn't heal him. Oof. So later, in private, the disciples ask Jesus the question that's burning in their minds. You can just feel their confusion and their shame. I mean, they've been given authority to do this stuff before. So why did they fail this time? What was missing? Jesus' answer is so direct, and it's really challenging. He tells them it's because of their little faith. Then he gives them this incredible, famous line. If you have faith that's even as small as a mustard seed, and we're talking a tiny, tiny seed, you'd have the power to move mountains. He's basically telling them, look, the issue wasn't the size of the problem you faced. It was the size of your faith. Okay, so just as the disciples are trying to wrap their heads around this powerful lesson on faith, Jesus completely changes the subject. It's another one of those jarring shifts. He pivots from their potential to move mountains to a prophecy about his own suffering and death. Can you imagine hearing this right after being told you have mountain-moving potential? Jesus looks right at them and says, the Son of Man, which is his title for himself, is going to be betrayed and killed. For guys who just saw him shining like the sun next to Moses and Elijah, this must have been completely incomprehensible. Now he does add that crucial final piece. He will be raised to life. But it seems like the disciples couldn't even process that part. The shock of hearing that their powerful Messiah was going to be killed by men just completely overshadowed any promise of a resurrection. And the Bible tells us exactly how they felt. They were filled with grief. The paradox was just too much. How could the man who commands demons, the man whose face shines with the glory of God, be handed over and killed? It just didn't add up. So the chapter ends with one more story that is both bizarre and wonderful. We go from divine glory and prophecies of death, and suddenly we pivot to a really mundane problem, paying the temple tax. But the way it gets solved is anything but ordinary. When they get back to town, these tax collectors come up to Peter and ask him this simple question. And Peter, probably not even thinking about it, just says, yeah, of course he does. But Jesus sees this as another teaching moment. So Jesus pulls Peter aside and asks him a question. Who do earthly kings tax? their own children or other people? And Peter gets it right. He says, others. Jesus is making a subtle but really powerful point here. If kings don't tax their own sons, then he, as the Son of God, is technically exempt from a tax for his Father's temple, right? So the principle is set. They're exempt. But then Jesus says something fascinating. He says they're going to pay it anyway so that we may not cause offense. He actually chooses to set aside his rights just to avoid creating a stumbling block for other people. But the question is, how are they going to pay it? The instruction he gives Peter is just amazing. He says, go fishing. And the very first fish you catch is going to have a 4 drachma coin in its mouth. And what do you know? That's the exact amount needed to pay the tax for both of them. It's this calm, creative, almost playful display of his power over the smallest details of life. So, when you step back and look at it, what do we make of all this? This chapter really is a journey. It starts with a breathtaking view of glory. Then it plunges us into the valley of failure. It teaches us that even tiny faith has immense power, but it immediately reminds us that this power exists alongside the reality of suffering. And it all finishes by showing that God's incredible power applies even to something as boring as paying your taxes. And that really leaves us with a big question, doesn't it? In our own lives, when we have those mountaintop experiences, those moments of clarity and joy and connection, how do we carry that view, that perspective, with us when we have to go back down into the messy, confusing, and often painful valleys of everyday life? That's the real challenge of Matthew 17.